Hello and a very warm welcome to the WTM Global Hub and today's webinar, The New Normal, Country Branding at the Time of COVID-19 and After. I'm joined, as you can see today, by a multitude of people from the BBC Global News team, and I'll introduce them to you in 2 seconds' time. But just before we start, let me tell you how this webinar works, because you can engage with us throughout the webinar by leaving feedback, ratings, and asking us questions throughout the talk. There's 3 grey buttons at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that and send us a question at any point, hopefully we will have time to cover it at the end. As I mentioned, though, I'm joined today by Samantha Adams, Alessio Nessi, and Alex Greenwood from the BBC Global News Network. And in a few minutes, I'll let them introduce themselves. But first, let's set the scene, if you will, for this webinar. We're living through, and I'm sure you all agree, some incredibly extraordinary times. With an unprecedented restriction on personal movement, all international travel is pretty much ground to a halt. Perceived norms are falling away at an incredible rate, and with numbers of flights dropping to a fraction of their typical figures in only a matter of weeks, this is a truly unprecedented time, as we've been hearing a lot about. What had seemed like an impossible reality in terms of sustainable travel has happened overnight. Flights have stopped, and we're into a new world. The question is this new normal really going to become the new normal? And how will an already flight-conscious traveller behave in a post-pandemic world? And so too for publishers, production companies and content makers. The old norms dictated that international travel was always possible at the drop of a hat. A default reliance on film to capture the colours, the sound and the beauty of destinations around the world has changed. Lockdowns have prompted the need to find alternative ways of telling stories, breaking our love affair with the recorded image. In a world will surely be reshaped by the COVID-19 pandemic, what does this mean for those at the heart of the travel and tourism marketing industry, and specifically in terms of sustainable tourism as well? What are the likely trends that we're going to see going forward? Well, luckily, we have these experts here from the BBC to answer all of those questions, and we'll look now at how the consumer mindset is likely to change and what impact the pandemic will have on strategy and production going forward. So let me first introduce you to Samantha Adams. Sam works in part of the news, sport, travel, business and featured content team for BBC Global News in the Buyers and Planning Network. So Sam, lovely to meet you.
Likewise, thanks Sam. So I'm Sam Adams, I'm VP of Advertising Sale at BBC Global News, and we're the commercial arm of the BBC. So we share international content on news, sport, travel and features to our audience through BBC World, which is our international channel which goes globally outside the UK, and we reach 500 million households a month. And also on bbc.com, again outside of the UK, to a global audience reaching 179 million unique users a month. So we work with advertisers and brands to really connect with our audience, and it's exactly who you expect to be watching an international channel. They're curious, they're globally minded, they're senior level, and they've got a real passion for learning about the world. And they come to us when we work with them on branded content, advertising, and sponsorship. And 5 years ago, we set up BBC StoryWorks to really address the need from clients for high quality BBC standard content. And we've worked on some amazing projects with the likes of Brand USA, Emirates, Dubai Tourism, Seychelles. And this is where my colleagues Alex and Alessio work, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi there, my name is Alessio. I'm an Associate Director of Production at BBC StoryWorks, and I take care of all the production and coming out of our team for EMEA, and working with a lot of advertisers on branded content campaigns.
I'm Alex Greenwood. I'm the Senior Content Strategist for EMEA. So I work on creative development in response to content marketing briefs from clients, agencies, and I work on creative development and then work alongside Alessio once we're in production.
Brilliant. Well, as you can see, a panel here of experts, and we'll be able to, over the next hour, unpack all of the topics that we're going to discuss. As I said at the start, if you want to leave a question for us, just use that grey button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and get to that at the end of the webinar. Alex, let's start with you on this one. I think you'll probably agree the tide was already changing with regards to sustainable tourism. And so how were tourist brands tailoring their content towards an environmental agenda before the pandemic?
Well, so I think the big thing is the way in which the kind of communications objectives are articulated, but that obviously follows the kind of the shifting consumer mindset, and so a few years ago we had a real focus on traditional TV commercials, very much about film, location, and that was the sort of the principal requirement. And then I would say, over the past few years, we've really started to see that change. And now you have a much more, I would say, wide-ranging approach to trying to portray a location and the people that live there. And I think this really reflects the way in which travel has changed. The previous norms of certainly of the traditional package holiday, and people very much going to a destination, and that's what they were there to do. Through the internet has been the biggest thing, and I suppose the democratization of how people research and book holidays has meant that people have started to kind of move away from that, and through this kind of customization, you're starting to see people pick and choose, and really that creates a closer connection with a destination, and so we're starting to see the communications really starting to reflect these different aspects of a destination. And then I think one of the really key things, and particularly with the current situation, is the fact that we had flight numbers, and certainly the number of people going on holiday was increasing year on year, but we were starting to see a kind of a pushback to mass tourism, but also the number of flights people were taking, and so the sort of sustainability angle was starting to come through, and I think that was something that we were starting to see more and more of, and so you started to get this, people really being aware of these different aspects and a kind of a cultural experience. That was something which was really clear. It was going on holiday was more than just a week away, to kind of get away from the world. It was really about connecting with somewhere new. And then as you kind of the sustainability sort of conversation got more and more prevalent, you were starting to see that sort of transform into people being more aware of the impact of mass tourism. So you start to see undiscovered destinations or places that weren't as busy. And again, it's all this kind of going into much more detail and discovery, which I think has been a really key thing for the briefs that we've had through, and then the way that we respond to them.
Exactly. And so bringing Sam into this here, how did different destinations want to be seen in this new environmental light that Alex talks about? Did cities look to new branding concepts and strategies compared to beach destinations, for instance? Was there any sort of different nuances that you observed through this work?
Yeah, we definitely saw differences. For example, when Alex was talking earlier, there's a lot of people going to sustainability, but for more cultural cities, that was just one element of a large part of their campaign. And they seem to be leaning towards the art and history and local experiences. So they wanted to communicate, the ambience, the feel, the food, the wine of the city, but doing it through a lot of real life, human stories, really. And so we've definitely seen a move towards culture, rather than glitz and glamour for a lot of the city destinations.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And tying into the sort of the strategy element again a bit, what techniques did you discover out of this research that Sam, I'm sure, will have passed around and you will have worked on to bring out the aims of the sustainably conscious traveller?
So I think just from a strategy point of view, I think the biggest shift really was, as I said at the beginning, you had the traditional television commercial, and that's brilliant. It can showcase the beauty of a location and give a sort of a snapshot. But as people's interest starts changing, I really think this kind of idea of customization, which is something which the internet and access to information has across lots of industries, this idea of kind of customization and being able to pick and choose what you want to do. that then was reflected in the type of content that we would want to put forward. So, you know, we started to go back with looking like segmenting trips and looking at, you know, different interests, and, you know, really, as Sam was saying, you know, culture is a really big thing, starting to explore not just the traditional history of a place, but also the contemporary history. That's something which was starting to come up more and more. And so you start to have this idea of these different aspects of what a holiday might mean, and almost in a way that we were starting to think of people being able to pick their own itinerary. And I think that was the kind of the first thing, I guess, is from a strategy point of view of how you showcase and allow people to really explore all these aspects of a potential holiday. But then from the sustainability angle, you know, the really big thing of alternative, again, taking this, people wanting to customize maybe an alternative view of the world, you know, alternative ways of traveling around a country or a city, doing stuff that was seen to be much more kind of eco-friendly. Or, you know, another big thing is supporting local businesses, you know, and making sure that the money that was spent when you were on holiday was actually supporting local industry. So I think when we first started to shape briefs, that was really, you're going for a much more like holistic view of a kind of a strategy. But then obviously from a production point of view, you know, there's other things that we were doing to make sure that we were kind of reflecting that, and that's certainly what Alessio was working on.
Yeah, and just like jump in on the back of that Alex's comment there. We also had we were researching about how people were connecting, and we have a research tool called Science of Engagement, which looks at facial recognition, so you can tell when people are like happiest or when they're most surprised by your content. And when we're like looking back at the different films we were making for people, you could see that it was the human interest stories that Alex talked about, which were really sparking the engagement throughout the audience.
Fascinating. Then, so Alessio, from that production side, what were you doing to kind of change the way that your team operated to follow that sustainable messaging and take on the lessons learned, like Sam said, from the research that you've done?
Hi everybody. I think like there has been a lot of steps really that have moved production into be a lot more sustainable in the terms than you know, we approach all our projects and we run all our campaigns. I would say that one of the main things that has been happening the last 3 to 5 years is we've gone more and more to use local crews to minimize travel. And we've done that in 2 ways, really. First of all, leveraging on the huge network of offices that we have on the ground around the globe. And that's, you know, something then by being such a truly international publisher we can do, because we leverage on that local expertise and the network of the offices they have in terms of creative to find storytellers and crews. And the other thing that we've done, we also focus on tech platforms, really. We've been working really closely with a lot of tech platforms that provide us connection with local crews, and we've done that by at the same time really keeping focus on the output and on the quality and the standards of the content that we produce, because that is really had never been a compromise that we could have taken. So we looked at tech to enhance the product and to make it more sustainable, and you know, always with a goal to reduce the centralization of production, so moving less people around and use technology to connect these people instead than physically moving it around. Then obviously it's something that you would link definitely at the future than possibly will expect us. So that's one of the first thing that we did. The other thing that we've done, I think, is really interesting, as a follow-up for a big initiative that the BBC has done in UK as a public service. We start to align with certification of sustainable production. For example, there is the Albert certificate. That is something that has been funded in 2011 and is government by the industry, the entertainment industry in UK and globally. And basically, there are some standards and a certification that guarantee that prove that your production is being has taken all the necessary steps to be as productive, as sustainable as possible. So we really start to work on our branded content campaigns, produce them with a real environmental hat on, and looking at ways to make it more sustainable, and receiving these certificates and labeling our content with a certificate. Then is also, we've seen, is something that is really, really important for clients as well, like because it's part of the transparency of our campaign and the way that they're made. Someone might talk a little bit about how our client responds to us trying as much as possible to make these productions sustainable, and the value them brings. That one definitely, and our compliance process that means then all our content resonate with BBC editorial standards is something that is a great value for our clients, really, and also for the people that watch our content. And
of course, that sustainable message, as we can see from this, influences all different aspects of the work that you do. And as you mentioned, this was a process that was happening sort of over the last 3 to 5 years. In essence, maybe March 2020 was a definitive moment. That's world sort of ended, if you will. And we're now into this new normal, as they call it, and indeed as the title of this webinar describes it. So as we're now in this sort of state of total lockdown, what now effectively? Alex, from a strategy point of view, on the brand side, we're considering that this total state of lockdown, what are the briefs that you're now getting?
Yeah, I think, and this is true of all sectors, and not just the travel and tourism. But the initial reaction was, we just need to stop, or it was a very immediate. We don't want to be, we can't be talking about it. We just need to avoid it. And then I think once people started to realize, the length that this was going to go on for, there was that realization that no, we need to still kind of, communication still needed, and it's something which now there's a conversation on how to do it, right? And that is, for us as a publisher, was also something which it was very immediate for us, because we almost overnight couldn't travel around the world, and all the things which Celeste was talking about, working with local crews and stuff, but still having that as an option for people being able to travel freely. And pretty much overnight, you had this situation where you couldn't do that anymore. And we really had to rethink how we would tell stories and how we were going to do that. So in a funny way, with clients, it was all a kind of, we were trying to work it out. But I think, for us, we really started to realize that the moving image in film is only a very small portion of what we can do. So, that started to become, what do we do now? And then you have the conversation around, how to communicate at the moment. That's the question. We went from a situation where no one wanted to talk about it to suddenly realizing that you have to. It's kind of, it'd be bizarre to not talk about it now. It touches everyone's lives around the world, and it's something that has to be talked about. But the bigger question now is the responsibility of how you talk about it and how you communicate it and how you strike that balance. And I think there's a real clear need to be, whatever it is to be genuinely useful if you're creating content. Because one of the sort of paradoxes of the current situation is, for most publishers, certainly for us, we're doing incredible traffic. People, as a trusted, one of the trusted news sources, we're doing a huge amount of page views, but that's across non-corona related content as well, because people need a respite. And so we're seeing traffic pick up, and so everyone's in this situation of like, what works, what do people want to know about? But clearly there's this idea of it being what has to be done has to be genuine, right? And I think there's a real moment of, just before there was a discussion about greenwashing, with people talking about being sort of using sustainability and not actually being sustainable. And I think now there's a real kind of process of trying to work out and not be accused of corona washing. But I think, just to bring it to the travel and tourism industry, is there is no, it's an innate human desire to want to travel and explore the world. That's never going to go away, right? That's always going to be there. But it's about how you adjust to what's going on now. So I think that for me is, you know, the situation that we kind of find ourselves in, and that trying to get that balance right of how you communicate, but not being seen to being opportunistic, because you need to keep that level of communication there.
You do, and I can clearly see from what you say how you at the BBC are doing that, embracing that change and reflecting it. Have you seen the patterns of the behaviour of your clients changing as well in what they want out of this?
I think we've seen clients wanting to, they know they need to do something, and everyone's trying to, the amazing thing is everyone's trying to work it out together at the same time. But I think people are starting to realize, particularly with travel, and I think this is one of the nice things, it does offer a sense of escapism for people. You know, it is really nice at the moment to be able to think about where you might want, or what you might want to do. And so I think, you know, for clients, or, you know, for advertisers, there's a really nice area that can be talked about, particularly with, you know, that people want to consume that kind of content. You know, people really are, you know, still interested, still want that moment to take them away from maybe the kind of the omnipresent you know, situation.
Of course.
So I think that area of kind of escapism and aspiration and all those kind of things is really there. But getting that balance right
in the new world, exactly. Sam, moving back to you for this one. We talk about this, the new world that emerges out of this, and what should we do then in a sort of brand and strategy perspective? How should brands communicate at this time? And have you kind of seen any examples of really good communication throughout the COVID crisis?
Yeah, so the majority of consumers feel that brands should carry on advertising, but as Alex was saying, it's really important to manage the tone of your messaging, and so we need to obviously be more flexible here. So it needs to be real positive messaging, and going back to brand values again, because I think that's the thing that keeps coming through on this. And I think we know that everybody's under a lot of pressure to either reduce budgets, or they're working with cut budgets, but there's a massive difference between reducing your budget and going completely dark on advertising. And what's going to happen is it's going to be the strongest brands that will bounce back first. So it's so important to protect your market share during the time. So even if you've got to cut your budget, just be really think about, continue to communicate with your audience, communicate with clients, because as Alex was saying, we're in this escapism phase at the moment where people are thinking about what they're going to do after lockdown. So even though they're not necessarily booking the holidays now, they are doing a lot of research. So it's really important to cover that, capture that share of mind, because it's about protecting your brand health at this stage. At the BBC, we've done a lot of research on consumer behaviours around COVID, and how that's what impressions they're getting from how brands are working. And it's really interesting because 1 out of 2 frequent travellers are looking to fly as soon as they can when the market opens up. So it's really, we've got to be so careful to continue to be communicating with them. So marketers really got to be thinking about a longer term strategy as well as their short term, how do I deal with my immediate issues?
Of course. And so bringing the points that you mentioned there sort of to the fore, do you think that particularly among consumers, we'll have maybe a more knowledgeable consumer when it comes to sustainable travel issues? As you point out, I mean, me and my family are spending this whole time saying, where do we want to go after this ends? I want to go that place. We're all having those discussions. And so do you think this pause can lead to people becoming more sustainable as a result?
Yeah, and I also think that it's given everyone a bit of a wake up, because I think for all the things that you plan in your life, none of us ever dreamt that we'd be in a lockdown, that we wouldn't be able to see our families. So I think it's really making you as people reevaluate your priorities. And for me, it's I want to travel again. I really do. And I want to do really interesting trips. Now, I love, lots of city breaks, but there's a few things that are on that bucket list, which well, if I don't do them now, I might not be able to. So it's definitely changed as a consumer, my focus on what to do next.
So, sorry, Oh, I love me.
You'll go first.
I agree. I think the big thing here, and it's again, it'll be in travel and tourism, but it'll be right across the board at the moment. Like, this will make people. There'll be a new set of values that comes out of the back of this, and what those values are. You know, everyone. I mean, everyone's got a theory at the moment, right? And you know, you hear some, and some are different, but whatever happens, like, that's going to be the key, like understanding what those values are and what people feel is most important. Once you've, you know, a situation like this massively makes you reflect on your life, your health, you know, and I think understanding those values, and I think this is, you know, these are going to be the fascinating research pieces that are going to come out of this in travel and tourism, but, you know, in lots of different aspects. But yeah, I think it's, and we'll come on to, you know, as we talk about what happens in the future, for me, those values are going to be key.
Yeah, I think interesting also, because to share a little bit of because possibly quite interesting insights for the audience from that research piece that we're running just in April. So it's very recent about the current situation. One really interesting data is, like, the value haven't changed. I mean, this pandemic hasn't completely changed the values that people had, and we found very interesting fact, like, for example, then 30% of our audience, and is a lot of big part of our audience, still think about way of living more sustainably. So, you know, travel more sustainable. So that values then we had, and they were kind of ramping up in terms of, like, people interest on top of that mind pre-COVID-19. They're still going to be there, and, you know, immediately after this huge disruption that is happening right now in a kind of, like, you know, when stuff hopefully is going to reopen soon, gradually, these are going to come back very strongly in top of people's minds.
Yeah, of course. And while we're with you, Alessio, I mean, this situation production is an incredibly physical activity. This must have affected the work you were doing massively. What was it like when we first went into this sort of period of lockdown?
Well, yes, you know, we've been talking about how we've done quite a lot of things about, like, kind of, like, you know, localizing production and try to fly people not as much around. But for example, when all the lockdowns started in different countries at different times, we actually had a crew in Antarctica exactly right at that moment. And you know, my team all of a sudden, and the extended team, obviously kind of, like, completely transformed. Like, it was all about health and safety, and it was about bringing these people, this crew that we had in Antarctica, and so far away from home, back home safely. So the safety aspect then, you know, it was really top of our mind, obviously. And, you know, we had a crew of 5 people on a boat in Antarctica, then try to sail back to land, and try to sail back to the country in South America, and nobody would let them in to come back home, because obviously, as you know, like, all the countries were closing their borders, and we will start to put contingency plan in place for them to sail back for 30 days across the Atlantic. So that was quite an adventure. Luckily, by, you know, extensive work and also the setup that we had in place in terms of, like, kind of, like, risk assessment measure that we already had in place, we managed to bring the crew back through Brazil, flying back from Sao Paulo. But you know, these were absolutely unimaginable circumstances, right?
Yes.
And the production industry, and, you know, film, but everybody part of that production environment is being kind of asked to kind of really stand up to absolutely unforeseeable circumstances, right? And everybody and the whole industry has really responded very strongly with adaptability and ability to change and focusing on the real important thing that at the time was really safety and be able to bring people home in a safe manner, but bring back to the family and in a more controlled situation. So that was one of the really thing that happened to us, like, almost overnight.
Wow. And that must be so hard to even plan, and spending hours on end just to get rescuing people from Antarctica. That is not something everyone says they can do for a daily basis.
Yeah, and really show, like, there is a lot of talking in the production industry, like in the environment, about like new kind of safety guidelines, and everybody's really working on it, and governments are kind of like, putting out new regulations basically on a daily basis. So there's going to be a lot of that in terms of like how that is going to impact production, and we're going to work, with the different local entity for different rules about adapting that safety measures. The other thing, like, obviously then happened to us straight away was looking at possibly, we had some campaign that were kind of like in production that we've been able to really kind of like look at and modify based on the restrictions, if it was the message was fitting for the time, and we've done a lot of that. Film is obviously something that is part of our DNA, because we're the BBC and we're so well known for that. But we're also, we've always done a lot of written articles and a lot of digital executions, like mini sites, interactive sites, a lot of animation. Then again, is really kind of like, we already had all the tools to carry on communicating in these circumstances, and it's something that we used to do already. But it's just a question of like the how quickly we had to really kind of like adapt to changes. Then at the same time, for us, because we work in an environment that is works so closely to the newsroom, we really adopt that adaptability and that sense of kind of like, the urgency to get message out is part of our DNA, really. So
of course
that's what we did.
Yeah, and such an unprecedented time, as we say, that I'm glad to see that such adaptability is happening indeed across the travel industry, and as we're getting questions coming in from people pointing out the ways that they've adapted and how they can adapt going into the future. And if you do want to leave a question for Alex, Samantha and Alessio to answer, just write that down in the grey button at the bottom of your screen, and in a few minutes time we'll come to some questions from the audience. We'll move on though now, and as the title of this webinar teased, what's next? What is going to be next for this industry? So Sam, what is the brief of the future then?
Gosh, I think it's going to fall into two main categories. There's going to be a greater emphasis on domestic travel for a little while. And then also, I think as we do look to do international travel again, it will be this new set of values held against it. So I think it's going to be challenging looking at domestic travel first, because so many like tourist boards and tourist organisations are used to communicating internationally to reach their audience. But now we've got to look at, the audience in your home country. For a lot of people, it'll probably be the first time they've taken a holiday in their native land for a long time. So it's going to be like rediscovering, your home country, which is going to be really interesting. It'll be interesting to see how many people continue to do that as the world opens up again. And then looking at travel, I do think we are, because we're not going to be traveling at the drop of a hat for a little while, everything's going to be more thoroughly researched. So, brands are really going to have to fight to get that share of mind, to make sure that, if we're consumers going from having 5 holidays a year to 1 international holiday a year, you've got to make sure that you can capture their attention and they choose your country to be. And also, I think there's going to be a return to nature. So people are going to be more interested in seeing the national parks and staying away from a lot of people for a while. They're going to want the big open spaces. But we still, the city breaks are going to come back. They just may take a little bit longer, because I know from my point of view, I just love that little burst of different countries' culture and ambience, which you can, go away for 4 days and feel like you've had a week away and just a complete break. So it is going to be interesting. It's going to be, I think brands are going to be really very strategic in how they approach this next year, and it's like going after where people be spending their money, and also it's like building again, going back to that market share and that presence of mind, so that when people are traveling again, they are choosing your country as a destination.
Of course, and I think that's something from the WTM side that we see every day. That strategic focus coming into the way people plan for the future is going to be so essential as we move forward. Over to you, Alex. How could communication change as a result of this, and indeed, how should communication change?
Yeah, so I think I completely agree. I think rediscovering domestic travel is going to be a really important thing. I think as Sam was saying again, the values for which people ascribe to be more critical about maybe where they choose to go internationally if people aren't flying as much. So really working hard to kind of for those values. And I really do think that's where branded content and going into those kind of stories is a really effective way of doing that. I think one of the things that people are really craving at the moment is human connections. So I think stories that involve people as a gateway to discover a destination. I think again that's a really nice tie-in with the kind of cultural interest. So I think that's going to be really important. And then I also agree, on the nature side of things, I do feel people are going to be looking for big open spaces in the in the immediacy. I'm sure the urban, the sort of urban city break will come back, but in the immediate, people really looking for that connection with nature. And again, from a communications point of view, this is a great opportunity to basically, as Alessio was saying, those values that were kind of there before, and now it's a chance for people to really rethink the way they interact with the world, and those aren't going to have gone away, but it's just about coaxing them back out, right. And so I think there's that the kind of sustainability angle, I think for me is more important than ever. I really feel like people are going to want to connect with nature and the earth again, not in a there's lots of other elements, but for me personally, I think that's going to be quite an important thing in communication.
I think that's very true. And in terms of we now sort of even more associate with the medical evidence that we're hearing every day of how being outside, embracing nature and being sort of more sustainable in our outlook really does benefit our health in so many ways as well, and people can associate it with that.
Yeah. And so I think it'll just be, in that mix of when you're putting forward your communications, of just making sure you get that balance right. And it's just, for me, it's
move forward in that way. And Alessio, is it possible to embrace the changes that have happened as a result of COVID-19 in this new world to benefit production going forward from some of the things that you've mentioned? I'm sure it is, but do you want to maybe shed some more light on what you think will be the particular benefits we'll see?
Yeah, I mean, change is going to be the word, like embracing change and adapt to change, and the ability for brands, for destination, and for storytelling like ourselves to embrace and live in a world that is going to be a lot more about change and adapting to change than it was before. It is going to kiss to success. Destinations possible have to revisit that product and change them based on the new norm, as we've been discussing. And I think for me, the campaigns are going to be successful in the future are going to be the one that are embracing change and are adaptable. So really focusing on ideas, go back to strong strategy and strong ideas. What my advice that will be to every advertiser that is about to commission a travel campaign is think about an idea that doesn't require a specific deliverable to be fulfilled. Be delivery agnostic in your process. Think about an idea that is just so strong and so translatable and so impactful that can be translated in a lot of different forms. I think we've been kind of used to in branded content world, but in general in advertising, to think about a lot about the finished product, right? To a series of films, a series of articles. Maybe it's a more broad kind of like thinking and strategy and big ideas, then they translate in beautiful, impactful communications,
Yes.
but with a level of change, then it's going to have to be built in, because there's a lot of uncertainty. There are going to be possible restrictions, travel and other type of restriction that could be a level up and down in the near future. So I think that's something that is really, really important. Don't focus on the product, focus on the concept, really. And
exactly.
And from a production perspective, is something that we've always really tried strongly to do, and is a concept that can be adapted for lots of different executions. And with that will go the aesthetic, I would say. I think the future of the aesthetic of branded content campaign and communication and campaign for tourism is possibly going to change, and the aesthetic of the world that we live in is already changed. I mean, these 4 squares is a very new thing for everybody, but all of a sudden we've adapted to it so quickly, and there is big traditional TV show that now are running this format, and and soon you'll see films that are shot in this way, and so that means the aesthetic of the campaigns are going to change. We lived in a world where we were moving around the world, very expensive equipment, cinema, Hollywood cameras, and filming, and the beauty of destination with all this amazing equipment. And also in the future, that's going to have to be reviewed, but creativity will always overcome any restriction and make the most out of restrictions. That's the word, the creative word. It's just it just adapts so quickly and change the changing the language doesn't mean that you change the end message. We're still able to communicate well, just differently.
Yes. And that's an incredibly kind of positive way. I think that we'll leave this element of the webinar on, and we'll move now on to some questions from the audience. And thank you to everybody who's been writing in. The message feed has been absolutely rolling away as people have been wanting to ask their questions to Sam, Alessio and Alex. And if you would like to, we've got around 15 minutes to try and get through some questions. So just use that button at the bottom of your screen to write some over to us. This one has just come in saying open spaces, parks, culture and nature orientated sustainable adventures will be the new demand, in effect. And this person says, I agree with Samantha. Do we start communicating, branding and promoting this now, or closer to reopening with borders and as we sort of begin to see global travel resume? Perhaps since they agree with you so fervently, Sam, let's move to you first. Do we start communicating now, or is it about embracing it once there's a bit more freedom to move?
Yeah, so I mean, every marketer is going to have their own set of restrictions. So it's and also every country is opening up at different rates. So there's not going to be a one-stop, answer for everyone. But I would say it is important to have some sustained messaging through this time, because this is, as I was saying before, this is the escapism phase. This is when people are starting to look for inspiration and what to do next. And I don't think there can be much more inspiring than the big open spaces and amazing footage that I'm sure everyone already has on what you can do there. So I would definitely be starting to communicate, but with the view of drip feeding into a much bigger campaign once we're more certain really about when the travel restrictions will be lifted.
Of course. Alex, anything from you on a strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, obviously you don't want to be seen to be promoting something that people can't do, but you can't be promoting something which is going against local, whatever the kind of restrictions are. But I think the key thing is thinking, who are you trying to speak to at that moment, right? Because if you're trying to speak to a domestic audience who may well be thinking, well, you know what, when this restriction drops, maybe in a few weeks, that's where I'd like to go, right? And you can maybe, I mean, nothing is predictable at the moment, but some things are slightly more predictable than others. And I think it's always thinking who you're trying to talk to. Is it a domestic audience in the immediacy?
Yeah.
are they able to get to wherever you're talking about without needing to fly, or without to, can they drive, what can they do to get there? And if it's, it's possible, and it doesn't, the only thing would be if you're saying something and people are looking at me like, yeah, but I'm never going to be able to get there. And at that point, it might be seen to be a bit sort of not quite hitting the mark. So always thinking about who are you trying to reach, and then where can they go? Are you actually helping them by allowing them the kind of a bit of escapism to kind of plan what they might do in the future?
Of course. And a question that's just actually come in now on the feed, with somebody's asking how to balance sustainability with the motivation to make profit and generate business success, because in this moment it's incredibly difficult for so many travel and tourism companies. How do they balance this message of sustainability with that need to still be kind of a functioning business? What's going to be the new normal in that sense?
Try to be sustainable. That's the thing here is people can travel around the world, and yes, they might not be able to fly as much, but there's still plenty of opportunities to be sustainable within that. And I think it's just a case of practice what you preach. And it's not an easy thing to do. And people work hard enough as it is, and to try and get up to that level. But for me, that's the most important thing. People want to see a genuine effort. And look, there's always going to be an argument. Is it people just saying it, or are they actually doing it, right? And some people are always going to take, but as a business, and particularly those in the travel and tourism, particularly if we're talking about sustainable tourism, not just from an environmental sense, but from from genuinely supporting local economies and stuff like that, really focus on that and showcase that. If you are doing it, showcase it. Just make sure that it's in proportion with the rest of the kind of your messaging, I think.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. We've had a question come in here from Samantha Mailing, a freelance journalist, asking, could the panel highlight any destinations or tourist boards that have been doing particularly well since the lockdown in terms of branding, communication, advertising, film and production? What sort of advertising has been most successful? Alessio, what have you seen that sort of sparked your interest?
Well, there's been, the communication has slowed down, but I've saw a lot of the usual, amazing kind of marketeers doing the activity that they do best. Thinking about the Middle East, definitely, in the UAE, we do a lot of work with some clients there. They've done some amazing work in North America. The like of Brand USA, they put a lot of communication out. A lot of things that have been very informative. I think that's what really audience want now. It is information and kind of aspiration for the future. What the travelers would do. I think it's great because I haven't seen advertisers try to exploit the current situation, because there could be some level of that. But I think the industry has been very, very focused and very, very, very great in the communication they've done so far.
That's very good.
Yeah, I don't really. It's very hard to pick one country or whatever. So I'm going to go a little bit of a tangent. I actually love the BA thank you ad, which was obviously just thanking everyone who was doing their part, to keep the country turning, as it were. Because I just felt felt in the same style as all their communication message. It felt a very natural fit. And it didn't feel as, we should be reacting and doing something. It just felt that it flowed. And I think that is really important to everything. It's that human sensitivity. It's finding the right tone. It was put out on social media. So it's kind of, everything felt very organic and natural.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, as you point out, because people don't want to be bombarded with advertising and branding just for the sake of because it's COVID-19. They want something, as you say, that is very organic and feels very natural and reassures them, as opposed to bombards them, as I say. A question that's just come in now from Rosalind. She asks, travel has been very focused on the visual aspect in recent years with Instagram, etc. And destinations were already focusing on how travel makes you feel over the last few years. Changing that aspect, maybe sort of co-opting that with visual images and how it makes you feel, etc. How do you think this will become a stronger factor going forward as a result of COVID-19 and the well-being benefits that can be seen from that?
Well, so from my point of view, I think the point that Alessio is making, which is about how whether or not our aesthetics will have changed after communicating over, these kind of webinars and video calls, and whether or not that will have an impact on, how we portray sort of visual imagery, right? Is the desire for human connection and just for stories going to outweigh the kind of glossy visuals that was kind of associated with travel for a long time? I don't know. It's a very interesting kind of meeting point.
Yeah.
But I think, in general, I definitely think that for a long time, the visuals of travel, because it's a kind of reliance, and understandably so, a reliance on locations and destinations to do the work, to really do the work for you. And that might change a little bit now.
Yeah, I do think visuals will continue to be really important because it's what inspires us and sparks our imagination. But I think we are a lot more aware now of what sight brings us, happiness really, and how things make us feel. And I do think that's going to get more and more important. I do think the whole COVID situation has brought more of a balance on sight to your mental outlook onto life. And I do just think that those themes of feeling good will continue to cut through and be part of an important part of messaging in the future.
Yes. Can I add something where we're talking about Instagram and the look and destination? Obviously, in the last couple of years, like the travel influencer word to a degree was unarguably on the decline. Like it was kind of after a big tide, it was kind of be fatigue. Will be really interesting what was going to happen in the next few months, and if I had to put a prediction together, will be a different type of influencer, possibly. A local view, a more local view. It's not going to be possibly the influencer that travel all over the world, but it's going to be like local influencers and show their own country, that destination in a more deeper, in a more kind of off the beaten track, track, and kind of in a more with more local knowledge, and I think that is going to be very interesting. If we go back to what are going to move the kind of the people to choose a destination in the future, possible will be a lot more insights and a lot more kind of become more and more of an aspirational place to take that decision if we're going to travel a little bit less, possibly, or if they're going to be less holiday during a year or internationally, you might that what's going to make you choose that destination is going to possibly be a deeper connection than ever before.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
It's a really interesting point. Like you said, we've talked about the authenticity of it all, and as you mentioned there, Alessio, that's what's going to be generated as a result of that. A question here from Zakia. She asks, as situations are changing so fast, will advertising at this stage be a bit of a waste of money, perhaps, if the situation, as they point out, changes so quickly? How can you reassure people in the travel industry that when they're putting out sustainable messaging, that whenever it is, it's not a waste of money?
I mean, first and foremost, the desire to buy, a new pair of shoes, for example. You might go off a pair of shoes. You might decide on a different one, for example. Maybe not. I don't, maybe it's a bad example. But the desire to travel is something which is so much. Again, for me personally, I don't know. Maybe other people's shoes is hugely innate. But that that's not going to go away. So if you can spark someone's interest now, that's only, they're not going to forget about that. It's, I do think that it's, if you sow the seeds now, people will have, travel can happen over a long time, right? They might travel now, but, in this, they might travel in 2 years. But the alternative of not doing anything, kind of just means they might want to go somewhere else in terms of what they see. So,
yes,
that, for me, it's travel is such a kind of desire, a human nature, such a desire to go anywhere. And yes, we might have peaks and spikes, and those values around health and safety and well-being might be important to bring through into your communication, right? So that people are kind of reassured. But ultimately, people are always going to still want to go away. It's just that how we do it is going to really change.
Yeah, exactly. And it really depends on your messaging, because now is not the time to say be, you know, selling airline seats, because obviously they're not flying, but you can be like growing those seeds. And it's like, I think you just have to be very careful not to go completely dark, and just to have some kind of messaging and connections to keep happening until we are in a more secure position.
Yes.
But the world is going to reopen. We are too used to traveling. We're not going to stay locked down forever. So it's what you want your brand to have, the best like brand health, as we'd say, so that you're ready to go as soon as the world does start to open up.
Perfect. And we'll end on that note of sort of when the world does reopen and that positive spin on it. In your opinion, what are the destinations that are going to emerge best from this? Will it be the more well-known ones, or perhaps emerging destinations that will use the kind of COVID experience to their benefit? Alex, go for it.
I think people are going to want to go to places where they don't think other people are going. You know, I really do. You know, this is the chance now. If you're, you know, if you're at, you know, I'm not saying the big destinations, no one's ever going to go to them again. But you know, if people are starting to research, people might want to go to where they think less people are going to be. And if that means that, you know, this is the opportunity, if if you're maybe not one of the most popular destinations within a continent or something like that, this really, I think, is an opportunity to be like, hey, look, you know, look how much space we've, and that I think for me is a really interesting potential outcome.
Yeah. For me, I'm planning lots of holidays. I just like to say, just going to single-handedly support the whole travel economy. And I do want to go back to places I've been before, and I'm really familiar with, because I just love them so much. But I do also want to choose somewhere where I've not been before, and because now I've got the time to research it a bit more. And I actually feel quite inspired to start pushing myself again. I think the whole COVID situation has been a wake-up call to a lot of people. Myself included, about how quickly it's like the years drift by, and I really want to be really positive and come out of this and explore more. Embrace
it. And Alessio, some last words from you on the situation. How do you see the rebound forming?
Yeah, I see a changing the way then we were possibly looking at certain things. Like I think health and kind of safety of destination is going to become like a priority, especially for people within travel with family. It's always been. It's going to be more and more of a focus in the future. So I think what I would say, destination that can offer a level of safety and kind of like they can guarantee that they put everything in place to their guests to travel in a safety environment is going to be very important from the virus perspective. Of course.
Well, thank you very much to all three of you for that fascinating webinar. I certainly learned an awful lot, and by the number of questions that have been flying in, I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you very much to Alessio, Alex and Sam from the BBC there. If you enjoyed that webinar, well, you are in luck, because on Thursday we have a second webinar on sustainable tourism right here on the WTM Global Hub. That's with Lynn Hughes, the editor of Wanderlust magazine. But all that's left for me to say is thank you very much again to Alex, Alessio and Samantha. And we'll see you next time on the WTM Global Hub. And until then, stay safe and see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, guys.